God's great plan for your life requires patience. Yes, we must remain faithful. We must trust. We must believe. But we must also remain patient. Listen, I've come to encourage someone that God's great plan for your life requires patience. Just as trees grow in seasons and not in seconds, our lives are the same. God's work in and through us is that of slow cooked and not microwave. God slow cooks. It isn't fast, but it's slow cooked. And patience produces inner strength. Faith carries us through, but patience gives us that inner strength to keep going. And every great plan that God has for you and I requires patience. God is not in the business. He's not in the business of withholding his wisdom towards us. Instead, he allows it to flow and pour extravagantly to those who ask. So the question is, will you remain patient? Will you remain patient? Will you believe? Will you have faith? Will you continue to trust God even when you can't trace his great plan or his path for your life? We must remain patient to what God is doing, to what God spoke over our lives and declared. Yes, it can be very hard waiting and trusting and believing. At times, we feel overwhelmed and we feel like, my God, I've waited so long. Will I be able to wait? Will I even be able to wait any longer? But God's great plan for your life requires patience. Listen, remember David. He was an anointed king, but he waited 15 years while suffering hardships, many trials and tests before he was even able to wear the crown. Because God's great plan requires patience. Oh yes, it requires waiting and waiting and waiting. Remember Abraham and Sarah? We all know the story of Abraham and Sarah. They wanted a child so badly. And God spoke and said, he will give them a child. They will have a child. But after waiting so long, remember Sarah, her patience wore thin. Can you imagine waiting and waiting 40, 50, 60, 70 years for a child that God promised you? And you keep looking around and you don't see no trace. You don't even see the plans. The plans are so far beyond what you can imagine. After waiting 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years, and there isn't a child in sight. So Sarah laughed and she began to say, a child. She laughed at God. But 90 years, after waiting 90 years, God graced them, Abraham and Sarah, with a boy child by the name of Isaac. See, we don't always know God's great plan. We don't know all of the details. God is a God of mystery. So we will never know in detail what God is doing. That's a part of his great plan because we knew we would mess it all up. But God operates on his own time. It's in God's timing because God's timing is that of perfect, of magnificent, of extraordinary, of exceptional. We must remain patient to trusting God, even when we can't trace his great plans for our lives. I just want to encourage someone on today to remain patient. Keep trusting. even when you can't trace his plans or God's great path. Continue to believe the promises that God declared over your life, because God declared that he is a promise keeper. And in James 1 and 2, the scripture declares, count it all joy when we're faced with trials and tests of many kinds, because we know the testing of our faith develops perseverance. We have to go through some long, hard, quite difficult tests and trials. At times, it seems like it's going to crush us to our core. But God declares, remain patient. Continue to trust, believe, continue to affirm every single day that God didn't bring you this far to leave you now. Continue to trust God, because God's great plan requires patience. I just want to encourage someone on today. James 4 and 8 declares, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. He will give you that inner strength, that peace, that patience to continue to go forth into all that God has purposed for your life. Yes, we must remain faithful. We must trust and believe, but we must never lose our patience. God slow cooks us versus microwaved. There's never a rushed or speedy process when there's purpose. God says remain patient. We must remain patient in trusting God. Every time there is great purpose or God has a great extraordinary plan for your life, it requires patience. It requires trusting that God is the great I am, and he is a promise keeper, and God will deliver on time. God is not in the business of withholding wisdom. Instead, he pours it out unto those that seek him every single day. But God requires that we remain patient in trusting that he will lead us unto our righteous path. I just want to encourage someone on today. James 4 and 8 declares, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. He will give you that inner strength, that peace, that patience to continue to go forth into all that God has purposed for your life. But I just want to declare to someone today that may be feeling like God's plan is so far from what he promised. Continue to hang in there. Continue to trust. Continue to believe, because God is indeed a promise keeper. And if God declared it over your life, if he promised you that you're purposed to do a great work, to exceed in whatever he's told you, God is indeed a promise keeper. You must only believe and continue to trust. Continue to remain faithful. Continue to remain patient, because God's great plan requires patience. I love you all so very much. I am Rochelle. This is Inspirational Cafe. Until next time, be blessed.